by the Afro-Saxon community, by the Afro-Saxon governments of the Afro-Saxons, whose history has been denied, and the history has been denied because you do not see it represented in the education system. And this is why NJAC has such a responsibility now to use the opportunity of being in office to begin to rebuild that, its representation of those interests beyond the competitions it runs with. The cultural thing is important, but there is a fundamental, more all-embracing culture of Africa, Trinidad, that needs to come into the corridors of power. And the same is to be said of MSJ, because MSJ ultimately is the element that represents labor, and it has to be absolutely clear that in the partnership, this is a political constituent that has the opportunity to really bring labor into the corridors of power in partnership with business, in partnership with other elements, with Tobago. But it has to rise to that representation. It has the potential now, and it has to use the opportunity of being in government to finesse its position, and it ought not to be in the position where it's compromised in a partnership government where its leader is a minister of labor and has to be representing the interests of business and government and labor. It ought to pull itself out and be clinically clear that we represent labor and we want to feed the interest of labor into national policy in every way. And that's the thing about a labor party. It is not trade unionism. Trade unionism is there to represent the interests of the employees in a bargaining unit. Labor views the world from the point of view of the working class, the people who have to, large numbers of people in most of these societies, although that is the structure of society is beginning to change because of technological revolution and so on, and globalization. But a labor party represents the interests of those mass numbers of people, and they force a government to take that into account in every sphere, not only with payments and wages, but in terms of the structure of the workplace, in terms of health protection, in terms of in the cultural area. And you have to have that voice of labor that makes no mistake about what it is and what it stands for, and it has to be prepared to negotiate with business. And this is where I feel that both of those elements are not quite certain about what is the interest they represent and how to protect the representation of that interest when they're in government.
So let me just clarify that there was an entire process that involved the union movement in early 2010. The trade unions were meeting initially around the issue of the revenue authority proposed then by the government, but we were also engaged in other things, and you know, we need to go further back to the process of the People's Democracy in November of 2009, the trade union actions of September 2008. So the union movement, more than anybody else in the society, I say so without fear of contradiction, the union movement was out front challenging not just the PNM as government, but challenging the institutional arrangements in the society. We were putting our bodies on the line. We were organizing. We were on the streets. We were doing mass work. We were doing education and so on. Even the CRF itself. I just went back into some of our records. The CRF itself was created out of the discussions at the level of the trade union movement. The first forum, for example, of the CRF, 17th of January, and then we had the formal launch of what was the Constitutional Reform Committee, emerged out of a joint conference of shop stewards and branch officers, which was held in March, I think, of 2001, and then the La Jolla meeting, which launched the CRC, and it was then in April. Our first meeting of the CR Constitutional Reform group or movement was in January, on January 17th, 2001 at La Jolla. So we have always attempted in all of the activities out there to engage the second rank of our membership, and through that, the membership of our unions. So that the initiative on constitutional reform was on the basis of a discussion with our second rank leadership. I just want to make that point very, very clear. So there's always been an interaction and a dialogue and discussion and a sense of consensus on what kind of intervention Labour, and I agree with Suniti in that regard, Labour not defining it as workplace issues per se, that Labour should make in the national crisis, from constitutional reform 10 years ago to people's democracy in 2009, 2009 in November, when Dennis himself represented the CRF at Woodford Square, when we were raising a whole range of issues which had very little to do with workplace issues. The majority of them had to do with issues of governance, of accountability, of transparency, and so on and so on. And so before we joined the coalition, there was a joint COSABO of the union movement on the 18th of April. And that was something that ought to have happened much earlier in 2010. It happened on the 18th of April for all kinds of reasons which we don't need to go into now. But 600 rank and file second rank leaders from across the union movement came and we discussed the political crisis. That is what we came together to discuss. And the workers' agenda, which was not just wages. Wages didn't even appear on it, quite frankly. The wage issue for PSA has dominated the headlines recently, but we came together to discuss a workers' agenda, which dealt with constitutional reform, it dealt with the issue of agriculture and farmers, it dealt with the issue of youth and of women, of Tobago, the whole gamut of issues affecting Trinidad and Tobago. And that gathering on the 18th of April mandated the intervention through the MSJ, mandated us. Now, the fact is that the MSJ is not yet a developed political party as the others are. That's a fact, we're not going to deny that, and we are now working to build the party. We didn't have a chance to do it before. Not going to get into a discussion on that, and the elections of 2010 did catapult us, Suniti is right, it did catapult us in a way that we saw was absolutely necessary for us at the time and for the country as a whole. And so we are now engaging in a process of party building, a very serious process of party building, and we will be having our founding conference later this year. And when that happens, then people can judge and see, well, have we built a serious party? Have we not built a serious party? What is it predicated on? What are the ideas? What are the policies and so on? And this is not the forum necessarily to discuss that. I just wanted to say that that is a process that is very much ongoing. And we had a convocation last Saturday. Was it last Saturday? 2 Saturdays ago. 2 Saturdays ago, at which our members came and mandated us to proceed to the founding conference and engage in a serious process of party building. So coming back now to the question of how do we see our role, we had absolutely no illusions as MSJ about what 2010 was about. And the nature of the coalition, we have absolutely no illusions about the fact that it is a multi-interest coalition. Suniti is right, very much a multi-interest coalition. And in that regard, we recognize that given where we were as MSJ as a party and so on, that as a party we may not be a dominant or large percentage of the government, but we have institutions that are separate from the party, that represent the interests of Labour, that we also are involved in, be it Fighton member organizations and so on. And those institutions of Labour representing farmers and youth and communities and so on will continue to act in the interests of those members, quite independent of what the government is doing, which is why ODBQ makes statements as it does, why I can participate in a demonstration with the PSA and then leave there and go to a meeting of the parliament or meeting of the parliamentary caucus, and I have absolutely no difficulty doing those things. And nobody in the government has difficulty with me doing those things, because it is recognized that that is what this is. And I think that what the country needs, and this is an important jumping off point, I think, the CRF discussion this morning, is a serious discussion about what a coalition is and what coalition politics are. because we are judging the partnership. I'm not now trying to defend all the things that the partnership government has done or has not done, but we are judging how the partnership functions against the benchmark of the PNM over more than 40 years of this country, post-independence. And from what Emmanuel Hussein said in the Commission of Inquiry about how Mr. Robinson ran the NER cabinet, we are judging it off of a benchmark of speaking with absolutely one voice, having no debate within the party or within the government or within the cabinet. And that is, interestingly, that is not what is taking place within the partnership. There is debate, there is discussion. Now, it happens that people see that perhaps as being unhealthy, that the thing collapsing and so on, rather than recognizing that debate and discussion and differences really is something that is positive for the country in terms of taking the country forward in terms of the democracy. Now, that is not to substitute for the institutional and constitutional changes that are necessary. So I'm not suggesting that at all. I don't want anybody to mistake. And therefore, this is a step along a process to get the right institutional arrangements, not only at the level of government and governance, but at the level of the economy and how the economy is organized and so on. I have absolutely no doubt about that. MSJ has absolutely no doubt about that. Fighton has absolutely no doubt about that. ODQ has absolutely no doubt about that. I can speak for all three equally. Right? So that we know that this is a step along a way of fundamental transformation of the political and economic and social relations in the society. But I do think that we need a real discussion about coalition politics, about doing things differently, about what stage are we at in the evolution of the post-colonial process. And I appreciate what Suniti said in that regard.
Could you just
yeah, just let me make two other. Yeah, we see. I didn't mean to engage in so much OLBC, but several issues were raised almost directly, and because the media is here, so I can't just allow that not to go without response. The other thing is about Colin MacLeod being compromised, or MSJ being compromised, being Minister of Labour. We don't hold that view. We don't hold a view either in the union movement, nor do we hold a view in MSJ that because he's Minister of Labour, that is a position that we're being compromised. In fact, we see that as being positive because there is a major agenda for reform of labor legislation in this country. Critical reform of the Industrial Relations Act and so on, because the reality is that the trade union movement has been terribly hamstrung in its development and growth and ability to represent the interests of more working people in this country by the laws that the PNM put in specifically to restrict us. And I'm speaking mainly about the Industrial Relations Act, which denies us the right to strike, for example. It denies us the right of freedom of association and a whole range of other things, and limits collective bargaining in a very real way. And we see the Minister of Labour as being able to champion the workers' agenda in that regard, which is a very important set of reforms, which, when achieved, will certainly enable the labour movement to be much stronger to deal with a lot of the other issues that it has to deal with in terms of the representation of its members in the broader sense. I'm not now just talking about wage negotiations, but represent the interests of its members in the broader sense. And we see the Minister of Labour playing that role, championing that reform. And yes, there's another role as Minister of Labour, which is as conciliator of disputes, but that is not the principal role of the Minister of Labour. And I don't think we should see that as the principal role of the Minister of Labour. And I'll stop there. There are other things I could say, but I'll stop there.
Let me just see if come to you, let me just see if I could add something, and you don't have to respond to me on this. It's something that, was a feature in all the way through your initial remarks about the question of negotiation.
Of interest.
Negotiation of interest, and the need for rules on how this negotiation takes place. And I think that David just mentioned, that there is need for, an understanding of what coalition politics is all about. And for me, listening this morning, I felt that was a key factor in how we're going to make coalition politics work. How do we work through the rules? How do we pay attention